Good morning, everyone. Well, if it's morning for you, like it is for me over here in Portland, or good afternoon, good evening, good early morning, depending on where you are. My name is Michelle Miller, and I'm coming to you from Oringo MBA Admissions Consulting in partnership with GMAT Club to talk with you today about how to get into the Haas MBA at University of California, Berkeley. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So first of all, again, this is me. Recent picture, so you really do know what I look like. Just a little bit about Oringo. Oringo is a comprehensive MBA admissions advising service. We help our candidates with everything from selecting the best schools for their profile and interests to making sure that their applications are compelling, interesting, well-written, and relevant. We'll get more into all of those pieces as this presentation continues. Oringo's been in business for 15 years now, making us a granddaddy in the industry. Quite passionate about what we do. I'm sure you'll hear that come through from me today. And I promise that's not unique to me. My passion comes from the excellent team that I work with. So enough about us. Let's jump in. Just some fun facts and basic facts about the Haas School of Business. First of all, I thought this was an interesting fact. Founded in 1898, which is impressive itself, but not only were they one of only 3 business schools, but they were the first at a public university. Now, flash forward to today, some important facts. In addition to their full-time MBA program, they also have an evening and weekend MBA, which is also quite popular. Their executive MBA. In addition to that, Haas has a Master's of Financial Engineering, or an MFE, a PhD, and of course, undergraduate programs. As of this last year, their class profile for the full-time program consisted of 500 students. It is a rather small class, which increases the competitiveness of the application. And I like to look up some of these diverse facts, like women, international students. Pretty impressive numbers here. Median work experience is actually 5 years. So if you've been wondering if you might be a little bit too experienced, quote unquote, for Haas Business School, you might not be. There's actually a pretty high amount of work experience among their candidates. And as you can see, they have an average GMAT of 725, and wow, an average GPA of 3.71. That's pretty high. Now, given some of these facts I just shared with you, I thought you'd like to see how they kind of stack up against the other top business schools. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the top schools that you might also be looking at. And this is, by the way, according to US News. So you can see here, they, at least as far as US News is concerned, they were ranked number 7. Again, this is as of this their latest publication. Their average GMAT at the time was a 715. But I want you to notice this GMAT range, 640 to 740. If you scan through the list of other schools, you'll notice they have one of the broadest GMAT ranges, which I think is important because it signifies that while they do attract candidates with high GMAT scores, that is not the singular factor that they're looking for. They're genuinely interested in the rest of your profile. And we're going to talk more about that today. Another thing I wanted to point out about their specializations here on the right, of course, I think we all know, and if you're even thinking about Haas, you know by now that Haas equals tech, sure. However, they're also one of the only top 10 business schools that emphasizes corporate social responsibility. A lot of candidates who have visited the campus, know graduates, and of course, current students and alums will tell you that this really is no surprise that corporate social responsibility is so important to them, given the fact that Haas absolutely values things like community involvement, responsibility, big picture. One of their 4 core values, or defining principles as they call them, talks about being beyond yourself. So this corporate social responsibility makes complete sense, and we'll get more into this in a moment as well. So while we're on this topic of what they're looking for, ask yourself if these describe you. Or I tell you what, if nothing else, these need to describe you. Throughout your application, you're going to want to demonstrate that you possess these traits. And by the way, I'm sure this PowerPoint presentation will be available later on YouTube as well. But if you need a refresher on what Haas or any other top business school is looking for, please feel free to visit our website, oringo.com. We have a funny name, you'll never forget. And if you visit there, you'll see we have a whole section of our website dedicated to the top MBA programs around the world. If you click on any of those schools, Haas included, you'll see a section about what they are looking for. And in that section, you'll see how these schools rank the common traits that business schools desire. Spoiler alert, they'll all rank leadership as number one. But once you move on from leadership, you'll notice that schools really differentiate themselves. One of the ways that Haas differentiates themselves is with their emphasis on community involvement, creativity, and initiative, which again, I think speaks highly of their 4 defining principles. Let's talk about those now. So in bold here, I have the 4 defining principles, but I also shared with you some ideas of what this looks like. Questioning the status quo. I really admire Haas's focus on this area because it demonstrates the importance of being willing to stand up, voice questions, share your ideas, work with others, and be willing to accept both success and failure with humility. Things like humility, confidence without attitude, skipping to the next one, these come up quite a bit when you learn more about the culture at Haas. Confidence without attitude, you'll also see it as confidence without arrogance, confidence with humility. This is another one that comes up quite a bit when we're talking about the Haas Business School. A Haas candidate, student, and alum will work with others, trust their work with others. They'll make their decisions based on data. So it's about having the confidence and the skills and the abilities, not just, well, having an attitude or being arrogant. It speaks well for itself, which I think also lends itself well to the next one, students always. I think a good signifier of someone who doesn't have arrogance or an attitude, someone who has humility, is someone who's willing to admit that they don't know everything. They certainly will never know enough, quote unquote. Certainly won't know it all, right? Willing, eager to learn, lifelong learners. And then finally, I talked about this a moment ago, beyond yourself. Haas candidates, students, and alums are thinking about the big picture. They're thinking about more than just their own interests. In fact, they're willing to put the larger interests above their own. Why am I taking a moment to drill these so much? Because you need to display these 4 principles throughout your application. And I tell you what, before you even pick up your pen, okay, fine, before you open your laptop or what have you, to start working on your application, you need to ask yourself if these resonate with you. If even one of them does not, Haas is not an ideal fit for you. And that's okay. I'm not picking on you. I'm saying maybe there's a school that's a better fit for you, because all 4 of these values cannot be understated. Now, some quick, fast facts for you. Timing and deadlines. Haas has 3 deadlines. Round 1 coming up very soon. You should already be wrapping up that application. I promise I'm not going to stop pointing that out today. Round 2, you should already be starting on that as well, FYI. And then round 3 is coming up in April. You'll notice that I went ahead and emphasized this again at the bottom. You should be writing your applications well in advance. If you haven't begun your application yet for round 1 at Haas, I strongly recommend that you apply in round 2. Oftentimes you'll hear and see discussions, in fact, here on GMAT Club, about the benefits of applying in round 1. We always recommend that you apply earlier when possible, but never for the sake of quality. Speaking of not waiting, please don't wait until the last minute. Here is a short list of what you're going to need to apply. You very well might find yourself in need of some additional information depending upon your work experience, where you went to school, etc. But these are the things that you can be guaranteed you're going to need. You'll notice I put a few stars on here for exceptions. Most schools have 2 essays, but we're talking about Haas today, they have 3. Not to mention, you could have more essays if you need to write an optional essay. We'll talk about that too. If you're reapplying, there's a designated essay for this, or if you're applying to a special degree program. Also, the TOEFL is not required if you are a native English speaker. There are some specifics related to Haas specifically as far as the TOEFL goes. So I encourage you, if you're in any doubt whatsoever, do contact Haas to find out if you need to take the TOEFL. So this leads me to the most important part of the presentation. This is where I'm going to tell you more about how you put together a stellar application. First of all, your resume. I love this line at the top, "You're special, prove it." That is actually a direct quote from one of my colleagues who says this all the time, and I think he's right to do so. At the end of the day, your resume is not just this formal document. It's a working document. You should be constantly improving it and adding on. When it comes to business school, this is your opportunity to demonstrate that you are not just another investment banker, another consultant, another engineer. Who are you? What is it that you have brought to the table in each position you've held? What types of achievements do you have? You might have noticed that I have that in all caps at the bottom. State your accomplishments. That should be the first bullet point under each title that you've held, is the accomplishments. And by the way, I recommend putting those in quantitative form whenever possible. 5% increase in customer kudos after initiating XYZ project. 18% decrease in dissatisfaction among employees after working on job community board. These are just a couple of very generic examples. You will have much better specific examples than this. But the point being, it's great when you can not only say that you've accomplished something, but you can even show how much, what the impact was, how far this went. Do make sure to note any impressive responsibilities you have. I make it a point to underline this point because your resume is not meant to simply be like a title and the description of what you do. Your title oftentimes will give a pretty solid idea of what it is that you do. However, if you have either an unusual position that's not common at similar companies, if you work for a company that's not as well known, for example, if you work for a small, maybe you work for a family company, not only might you want to take the time to explain what you do, but you should also take the time to explain the company. International students, this can be especially important for you too. Realizing that you're applying to a school in the United States, they might not know as much about the company that you work for. So this is an opportunity to give them some more detail. A few examples I've seen in the past. Largest security company in Brazil. Italian equivalent to the United States NSA. These are just a few examples that I've seen in the past. But do feel free to give them some more context. Now, one of the things that was on the previous slide that I hadn't talked about yet was how you should also be able to connect your past to your future goals. Now, before you even begin to do that though, not an unusual question here. Candidates often do ask us, how do I even know what my goals are? Most candidates have at least an idea of the direction they'd like to head in, but knowing that when you apply to a top business school like Haas, you need to be able to articulate the specifics, you might need to take a moment to decide which goals make sense and how they connect to your past. So these are the steps that we recommend taking. First, sky's the limit. Seriously, imagine your dream career. If you could do anything, what would it be? Okay, maybe not anything, because if you just want to, win the lottery, you might not get an impressive story out of that. But once you've brainstormed, dream careers, dream job. Now start to imagine what are some possible directions you could take that branch off of these dream jobs. The next step is to make that connection. Explain why your experience has a dotted line, as we call it, to your future. You do need to be able to make the case for why your the MBA and at this school, so in this case we're talking about Haas today, you need to make the case for why a Haas MBA is the most reasonable choice for your future plans. But you'll note we added here, show likely success. So you don't want to simply put it in the hands of the school. You don't want to say, yes, I've always worked in strategy consulting, but I want to be an investment banker, and that's where Haas is going to come in. It needs to be more specific than that. And you need to be able to show how your past experience is preparing you for that next step. Number 3, networking. This is such an important part of the application process. And if I had to rate some of the most common candidate mistakes that I see, it's in failure to network. We all know that one of the great benefits of going to a top business school like Haas is a network you're going to be part of, but you should already be actively seeking them out well before you apply. Now, as you can see, we're big advocates of LinkedIn, but when I talk about LinkedIn, I'm not referring to simply jumping on and just finding a student and then, sending them several messages. Instead of doing something like that, I recommend finding a club or an organization on LinkedIn. You might even be able to find an alumni association. In fact, I forget that I said might. You definitely will be able to find one. This is a great way to get to know people. And the reason you want to know students and alums of Haas is so that you can learn more about the culture from people who have lived it firsthand. This is one of the reasons why I believe candidates fail to do this as much as they should, because it's not a immediate payoff. It doesn't seem as tangible, but I can assure you that when you sit down to begin working on the essays, you're going to be glad that you have heard some real perspective. In addition, go to MBA fairs, go to info sessions, visit campuses whenever possible. I almost want to draw a line through whenever possible and just put an exclamation point. Visit campuses. I'm a huge advocate of visiting the campus. Quick story, not kidding. Had a candidate 2 years ago who lived overseas. Understandably, she wasn't able to visit the schools that she was applying to. She decided that the school would probably understand, which, by the way, don't worry, this story isn't that horrifying. I'm sure they did understand. However, she called me after her interview and said, Michelle, the interview was so much fun. I connected so well with the interviewer. And then at the end of the interview, the interviewer said, by the way, have you had a chance to visit the campus? She said, Michelle, I would have done anything in that moment to have been able to say yes. So I tell that story a lot. If you attended my other webinar a few weeks ago, you probably heard me tell the same story. I call it the deer in headlights. So if nothing else, don't be the deer in headlights. If you don't believe me on anything else, be able to say yes. Now, how should you approach your essays? I'm going to hurry through this because I actually have some information on the Haas essays themselves. But these do give some good tips about how you should begin. Strategize, make sure you're answering the questions. I could put an underline under that. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes I see in applications themselves is getting off track and not answering the question. Connecting your answers to your goals, frequent theme that comes up a lot. Say modest, honest, and mature. I think that is worth repeating given those defining principles that we talked about. Confidence with humility, right? Be careful when recycling essays. This is another one where I almost want to just draw a line through it and say, don't. Don't get me wrong. You are you. Your background is your background. I'm not saying you have to start over 100% with each school, but you definitely do not tell Haas the same story that you tell UCLA. Tell Ross. Each of these schools are looking for different candidates. So, speaking of essays, here are the 3 essay questions for Haas for their current application. Take a moment to talk about these, because these are actually some great essay questions. Why do I say they're great? Because they practically do the work for you. All these things we've been talking about today about be yourself, be genuine, be confident but not arrogant. Why is Haas a good school for you? Why are you a good leader? What do you want to do in the future? How has your past experience prepared you for that? They spell it out. They literally tell you. For example, look at essay number 3. Describe your post-MBA goals. How have prior experiences motivated and prepared you? You have no excuse not to answer that question. Also, going back to essay number 1, I personally appreciate this question because it's so creative. Tell a 6-word story that reflects a memorable experience in your life to date. Fun activity, I think, might get the juices flowing. If you visit Haas's website and check out the section about their admissions team, each member of the admissions team has their own 6-word story. And they're great. They all reflect completely different experiences that were important to them. I think they'll give you some great ideas. Now, after you give the 6 words, they're giving you 250 words max to elaborate. This is another point that I'm asked about all the time. How important are these word limits? Important. Don't go above them. I really do mean it. It can seem like such a small thing, especially once your essay is done and written and you check that word count and you realize you're at 275 words. It can feel like, oh, that's not a big deal. It is. Look at it this way. One of my favorite consultants here at Oringo often says, you know that guy at the party that takes too long to introduce themselves? Don't be that guy. In addition to cute stories like that or cute expressions like that, keep in mind these admissions committees, and Haas is no exception, they are reading so many applications. They receive so many more applications than they're going to be able to admit. Don't overstay your welcome. Follow the directions. Now, recommendations. Everyone laughs when I can hear them at this quote at the top, but you know what? That's a real quote. I seriously did have a candidate ask me that once. Now, there's an exception, of course. If you work for a family company, your mom very well might be your boss. And in that case, the answer is yes, but it's about doing it right. Usually, you'll find that 2 recommenders are required. Haas is no exception. Choose them carefully, of course. But when I say choose them carefully, there's a few points that you really do want to remember. First of all, your letter's recommendation really should be from a work setting. To give you a contrast of what I mean by that, professors, teachers from undergrad usually are not appropriate for a business school recommendation. There are exceptions. For example, if you somehow reported to this professor, say you worked in a lab for a project or experiment that he or she was overseeing, or you worked as a TA, things like this, that could be considered a work setting. But even then, we always prefer that you use recent workplace examples, preferably from your supervisor. Any top school, Haas is no exception, is going to prefer that your first recommendation be your direct supervisor. However, don't panic. If you have one of any reason, it's probably one of the most common reasons for not wanting to use your supervisor, such as, actually, I don't really want to tell them I'm applying to business school right now, I don't want to rock the boat, then feel free to use either a supervisor from a previous company or brainstorm some other people who could give clear, specific examples of who you are. By the way, don't hesitate to reach out to us for help in choosing recommenders. That's a common service that we are glad to provide. Extracurricular activities. Now, getting back to Haas specifically here, remember earlier when we looked at what the most important traits to them were? There was community involvement, first of all, was ranked quite highly. And then there are 4 defining principles. Above yourself, beyond yourself, beyond yourself. Of course, Haas is going to want to hear about extracurricular activities, especially if you've done some volunteerism, any sort of giving back to your community. Not to mention, these are great opportunities to demonstrate your leadership and your teamwork skills. Back to standing out on your application. Something I love about a candidate who has a strong extracurricular activity, sometimes they can answer essay questions and interview questions with examples beyond what I call the 9 to 5. How cool is it if you can talk about, for example, maybe you helped raise a large amount of money at a charity for the nonprofit you're involved with, or how you touch someone else's life by working with them as a mentor. These are all things that can give more color to your application and help you stand out. That's why you hear so much chatter about extracurriculars, because it does help show you as a well-rounded person, demonstrates that you have passion in everything that you do, and again, you're giving back to the community. So I can't understate these enough. Extracurriculars are important, especially to Haas. Number 7, last tip here, online presence. One of my colleagues says this all the time, you should Google yourself because you know your interviewer well. Now, we give you tips here on how to perfect your LinkedIn profile, and do take all of these recommendations. But since we're running low on time, I wanted to quickly note one other part, which is that you really should check out your social media presence as well. LinkedIn, of course, here, most of the time there isn't a problem. It's just about emphasizing the strengths a little bit more, etc. I'm referring to when we help candidates strengthen their LinkedIn profiles. Usually not too many concerns about inappropriate content. But this is a good time to ask yourself, if an admissions committee member or interviewer or any other representative from Haas were to look you up right now, would they like what they see? I like to often use the expression that even if you keep your social media clean, what about your friends? Do you have a friend, or maybe that Uncle Joe, who might post something questionable on your page? Take the time to clean up your social media. You want it to represent who you are as a professional. You don't want it to cloud your appearance as a highly qualified candidate that you are. Speaking of interviews, here are some common Haas interview questions. In fact, we keep track of interview questions every year at ARINGO, and these were the questions that were the most commonly asked over the past 2 years. Of course, why Haas? Question than it sounds. Remember the talk about the 4 defining principles? You want to know those, live those, eat them for breakfast, as the expression goes. You really do need to be able to articulate why Haas is right for you. How would you describe your leadership style, and how would others describe it? One of my candidates last year, the interviewer went so far as to ask her, how do you describe your leadership? And then after she answered, how would your friends describe it? And after she answered, how would your coworkers describe it? Really made her stop and think about not just how do I see myself, but how do others see me? Be prepared to talk about that. Tell me about an ethical dilemma you face. Great opportunity to show that you can go beyond yourself. And back to those defining principles, which one do you most identify with? I love that question because, frankly, I believe you should answer it honestly. Which one really jumped out at you? And of course, what are your short and long-term goals? Always an important question. All right, I think I'm right at time, which is good. I didn't have to skip anything, although we did speed through a few things. So first of all, thank you for joining me. I wish you so much luck in your applications, but I tell you what, okay, luck should only be a small part of it. Now, I'm going to turn off my presentation here and switch back over to the Hangouts so that I can answer your questions. Okay, let's see here. So first question, and by the way, I guess I should take a moment to say, please feel free to send your questions into the chat room, and I will answer as many of them as I can with our remaining time. Let's see, how much quant focus is Haas in its application? If I'm understanding your question correctly, quantitative is always an important focus, honestly, to any top business school. But given the fact that Haas does have its specialty in technology, you can assume that the quantitative portion is going to be important to them. You need to be able to demonstrate high strategic analysis abilities. You definitely want to make sure that your GMAT score reflects your quantitative abilities, and frankly, whether it does or does not, I recommend demonstrating this in your in your resume as well. That's important to note because you might want to think about if you did score lower than you would like on the quantitative portion of your GMAT, you might want to consider, first of all, whether your work experience makes up for it. For example, common scenario I run into, candidates who work in investment banking, engineers, you name the job that is obviously quite quantitative in nature. Maybe they get a lower than desired quantitative score on the test. Keep in mind that the admissions committee will see your background and consider this. But this is a hard thing to give a general statement to. Every candidate is different, and if you're unsure at all, feel free to reach out to us. We have a free chances calculator on our website. We also offer complimentary consultations. So feel free to reach out, and we can even help you decide if you should give that GMAT another try, or if your work experience says it all. Usually it's more of a discussion. Okay, what type of qualities does Haas look for in an international candidate? Everything we talked about today: creativity, community involvement, innovation, smarts, willingness to continue to learn. Remember, confidence without arrogance, confidence without attitude, confidence with humility. Being an international student does not change what they're looking for. Can you explain in your optional essay if you could not visit the school? That's a tough one. The optional essay really should be used sparingly. I prefer to use the optional essay for some of the real standout factors like a low GMAT or a low GPA or a gap in work experience. I don't know that I would want to use the optional essay to explain that because honestly, whether you have visited the school is not a part of the formal application process. So I don't know if I would want to bring attention to the fact that you have not visited, if I'm being candid. And by the way, do try and visit, but hey, every situation is different, and I believe you when you say you could not. You mentioned a very high average GPA at Haas. How do you understand when to explain your GPA in the optional essay? What I would recommend with Haas, and by the way, for any other top 10 business school, honestly, since the range tends to be 3.4 to 3.6, yes, Haas is especially high, I would recommend that if you have a GPA of 3.2 or below, that you take the time to explain it. Hi, yourself. Will having been to summer school for Haas add any advantage? Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's advantage. It's probably one of those intangibles, kind of like what I was talking about networking, right? You're probably not going to meet the one person who is best friends with the dean and can make sure to get you in, but you can learn more about the culture of the school. And showing that you attended this summer session, if nothing else, it demonstrates a true interest. And that's not a small thing. Can you give some examples of 6-word stories? Should it be a personal or professional story? Of course, I'm going to recommend professional. After all, this is business school. But oftentimes, as I'm sure everybody here can relate, sometimes the two overlap. Of course, we're human beings. We don't turn into robots when we walk in the door at work. So think about what type of value it can bring to your application if you do choose to share a personal story. I mentioned earlier that the admissions staff at Haas has their 6-word stories published, and they vary quite a bit from personal to professional to kind of motivational. And I think that any one of those stories could be translated well. Since you do get 250 words to further explain what you meant by that 6 words, I think there's probably going to be several successful applicants whose 6 words actually reflected a personal experience, but it was such a defining factor in who they are and has shaped them as professionals that it could be a relevant story. Excellent question. I think we have just a couple more minutes for questions. Please don't hesitate to send more in. And while I'm waiting for more questions, I wanted to remind you, or anybody who may have missed the first part of the presentation, if you visit our website, aringo.com, there are quite a few complimentary materials on there. We have a chances calculator where you can actually get a rough idea of your likelihood of success in being admitted to one of these schools. You can also register with us for a free consultation. And then again, many complimentary application materials and resources. We have the deadlines of all of the top schools published there and their essay questions. We're more than happy to help you out. And then of course, if you're looking for professional service, it's worth repeating. We've been in business for 15 years now and have some pretty extraordinary admission statistics. Oh, good. Here's some more questions. How should I prep my recommenders for the other question? Confidence without attitude essay for recommenders. That is a great question because, first of all, we all know, I hope you know, and if you don't, I'm saying it now, that you should absolutely prepare your recommenders. Please do not just ask your recommender to be your recommender and then leave them to their own devices. Don't be wrong. I've never seen a letter of recommendation that has been, negative or anything like that. But what I do see are letters that are entirely too general, and they need specifics. But this question, it is more personal, isn't it? Confidence without attitude. How to help prepare them. What I think would be the best way to approach this would be to sit down with them and discuss some of the specific accomplishments that you have had at work, or maybe times that you have had to overcome a problem or a dilemma in your workspace. Chances are, if you can get them thinking about some of these situations, obviously that they were involved in themselves, that will help get the juices flowing. Do you think Haas is more selective than its peer schools? They have a crazy admit rate. I know. Part of what drives this rate is not only is Haas a highly competitive program in itself, but it also has a small class size. I think they even have it written right on their website that they receive so many more applications than they can actually admit. So that in itself definitely plays a factor. In addition to small class size and reputable program, you should also remember that Haas has some pretty unique offerings. For example, the emphasis on corporate social responsibility. That's becoming a more common thread, especially as candidates are interested in fields like social impact. So there's some definite overlaps into that realm. All right, one last question and then we're going to have to wrap it up. Do you think it makes sense to do a Bay Area internship in the spring semester and talk about it in the essay as a Haas differentiator? What a great question. First of all, I think internships can absolutely be an interesting thing to speak to in your application. It's professional work experience. It no doubt prepares you and helps shape who you are. Not to mention, if it's in the Bay Area, of course, you stand a good chance of some name recognition. How about I would just say, without having more details, that if nothing else, I can't think of a reason why it would not be an interesting factor. But you probably need to be able to talk some more specifics. Feel free to register. I know I've said this a few times now, but I really do mean it. We do offer complimentary consultations, so please do feel free to reach out and talk it over in more detail with us. All right, everyone, this has been a true pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Wishing you all the best of luck. But like I said earlier, more than luck, I wish you all the best of preparedness. I wish you the gift of time and focus and energy and lots of coffee, as we love here in the Northwest. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.